Ireland is a land of myths and legends, its rolling hills and ancient forests steeped in tales of the supernatural. From the banshee to the puka, many creatures have haunted the imaginations of the Irish people for centuries. But few are as terrifying and malevolent as the Bánánach. Unlike the familiar banshee, whose wails merely announce death, the Bánánach are creatures of death itself, embodiments of chaos, war, and carnage. In Irish mythology, the Bánánach were said to be war spirits, or demonic entities, that appeared on battlefields, shrieking and wailing as they roamed among the dead and dying. These foul creatures were believed to descend from the sky, twisted and gaunt, with hollow eyes and bat-like wings, feeding off the violence and suffering around them. Some say they guided the souls of the dead to the underworld, while others believed they simply reveled in the carnage, delighting in the agony of the fallen. The Bánánach are often associated with fields of war, but their influence is not limited to ancient battlefields. Even in modern times, there are whispered stories of these creatures returning, drawn to places of great suffering, unrest, and death. Wherever they go, they bring fear, madness, and ultimately destruction. Those who encounter them rarely live to tell the tale, and those who do are forever haunted by the sight of these hideous beings. Tonight, we tell the story of one such encounter, a chilling account of terror and survival, where a man stumbles across the Bánánach and learns just how powerful and horrifying these ancient spirits truly are. Liam O'Connell was no stranger to solitude. Growing up in rural Ireland, he had learned to appreciate the stillness of the land, the way the fog clung to the hills in the early mornings, the soft rustling of leaves in the ancient forests that surrounded his small cottage. His life was simple, quiet, and uneventful, just the way he liked it. But that all changed one stormy evening in late October. Liam had spent the day working on his property, clearing fallen branches and preparing his garden for the winter. The sun had set hours earlier, and the wind had begun to howl through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain. But Liam wasn't ready to go inside just yet. He enjoyed the wildness of the weather, the way the world seemed to come alive during a storm. So, with his lantern in hand, he ventured out into the fields that bordered his land, drawn to the open space and the darkness that stretched out before him. The wind whipped against his face as he trudged through the wet grass, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the ground. In the distance, he could hear the low rumble of thunder, but for the most part the night was quiet, too quiet. As Liam reached the edge of his property, something made him pause. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end and a sudden chill washed over him. It was the kind of primal fear that had no logical source, the kind that made your heart race and your mind scramble for answers. He stood still, listening to the wind, straining to hear something, anything, that could explain the sudden dread that had gripped him. And then, faintly, he heard it, a whisper. At first, Liam thought it was just the wind, a trick of the storm playing with his senses. But the whisper grew louder, more distinct, and he realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was a voice, a woman's voice, soft and eerie, carried on the breeze like a forgotten melody. Liam. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no one out here. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. Liam. The voice came again, closer this time, and it was unmistakable. Something was calling his name. He raised his lantern higher, scanning the darkened field for any sign of movement. The wind howled louder, whipping through the tall grass, but the voice persisted, growing more urgent, more insistent. Come! Panic gripped him. He spun around, his lantern's light swinging wildly, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the endless stretch of land before him. But the whisper didn't stop. It was everywhere now, all around him, filling the air with its eerie, sing-song quality. Liam stumbled back, his mind racing. He had heard stories, old tales about spirits that haunted the land, about beings that fed on fear. But those were just stories. They couldn't be real. Could they? Suddenly the ground beneath him trembled and the whispering stopped. For a moment everything was still. The wind died down, the world held its breath, and Liam stood frozen in the silence. And then he saw it. In the distance something was moving through the field. Something large, dark, and twisted. At first it was little more than a shadow, a black shape that seemed to slither through the tall grass. But as it drew closer, Liam's lantern flickered, and he caught a glimpse of the creature's true form. The Bánánach. It was hunched and gaunt, its skeletal frame wrapped in tattered rags that fluttered in the wind like ancient burial shrouds. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its hollow eyes glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. But what was most terrifying were its wings, vast leathery appendages that unfurled from its back like the wings of a bat, casting long shadows across the ground as it moved. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a low guttural hiss that sent a wave of terror through Liam's body. He stumbled back, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to move. He was paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of the Bánánach as it slowly crept toward him. The air around him grew heavy, thick with the stench of death and decay, and Liam could feel the creature's presence pressing down on him, suffocating him. It was as if the very world was shrinking, collapsing in on itself, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The Bánánach's voice, cold and mocking, filled the air once more. "Come!" Liam's paralysis broke in an instant. His survival instinct kicked in, and without thinking he turned and bolted toward his cottage, his legs burning with the effort as he sprinted through the field. Behind him, the creature let out a piercing shriek, a sound so unnatural and horrifying that it made his blood run cold. He didn't dare look back. The wind roared in his ears, the tall grass whipped at his legs, and his lantern bobbed wildly in his hand as he ran. His mind raced, desperate for a way out, for some means of escape. But no matter how fast he ran, the creature was faster. He could hear it behind him, its wings flapping, its claws scraping against the ground as it gained on him. The Bánánach was relentless, its hunger palpable, its desire for his soul like a burning flame that consumed the air around them. Liam's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he kept running, the fear driving him forward. His cottage was in sight now, just a few hundred yards away. If he could just make it inside, if he could just reach the door. But as he neared the cottage, the Bánánach struck. A cold, bony hand clamped down on his shoulder, and Liam cried out in pain as the creature's claws dug into his flesh. The force of the blow sent him crashing to the ground, his lantern flying from his grasp and shattering on the rocks. The light went out, and darkness swallowed the field. Liam struggled, thrashing against the creature's grip, but it was no use. The Bánánach was too strong, too fast. It pinned him to the ground, its breath hot and foul against his neck as it leaned in, whispering in his ear, "Your time has come." Just as the creature's claws began to close around his throat, a blinding flash of light filled the air. The Bánánach screeched, recoiling as the light engulfed it, its wings flapping wildly as it retreated into the shadows. Liam gasped for air, his heart racing as he scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with terror. The light was coming from his cottage, from the window. Someone, or something, was inside. He didn't think, he just ran. The Bánánach let out another screech, but this time it didn't follow. The creature lingered in the darkness, its hollow eyes watching him as he stumbled toward the light, toward safety. Liam reached the cottage, his hands trembling as he threw open the door and collapsed inside. The light was blinding, pure and warm, a stark contrast to the cold, malevolent presence outside. For a moment he simply lay there, panting, his mind reeling from the horror he had just experienced. But then slowly the light began to fade. Liam forced himself to his feet, his body aching with exhaustion. The light was gone now, and the cottage was dark once more, the only sound the ragged rhythm of his own breathing. But he wasn't alone. The Bánánach was still out there, waiting. He could feel it, its presence lingering just beyond the walls, its hunger growing with each passing second. It wasn't finished with him. Not yet. A knock echoed through the cottage. Liam's blood ran cold. He turned toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. And then the voice returned. "Come." Liam backed away, his mind racing. The Bánánach couldn't enter, not without an invitation. He had heard that much in the old stories, but it was only a matter of time before the creature found a way in, and when it did, there would be no escaping its wrath. The knock came again, and this time the door rattled in its frame. Desperate, Liam grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and held it in front of him like a weapon. He knew it wouldn't stop the Bánánach, but it was all he had. "Come," the voice whispered, closer now, just on the other side of the door. Liam's hand shook as he held the poker out, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The door creaked, the hinges groaning as something pushed against it from the other side, and then with a deafening crash, the door burst open. The creature stood in the doorway, its wings unfurled, its hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. It was even more terrifying up close, its skeletal frame towering over him, its claws extended, ready to strike. Liam swung the poker with all his strength, but the Bánánach was too fast. It dodged the blow effortlessly, its claws lashing out and knocking the weapon from his hands. The poker clattered to the floor and Liam stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature advanced, its breath hissing through its jagged teeth as it closed in for the kill. But just as the Bánánach reached out to claim him, the light returned. It wasn't coming from the cottage this time. It was coming from Liam himself. A warm, golden light radiated from his chest, filling the room and pushing the Bánánach back. The creature screamed, its wings flapping wildly as the light consumed it, burning away its dark, twisted form. Liam watched in awe as the creature writhed in agony, its body disintegrating into ash. And then, with a final piercing scream, the Bánánach was gone. Liam stood alone in the darkness, the light fading from his chest, his body trembling with exhaustion. He didn't know where the light had come from or why it had saved him, but he knew one thing for certain: the Bánánach was gone. The night was quiet once more, the wind having died down, the storm having passed. But Liam knew that the terror he had faced would never truly leave him. The Bánánach was a part of him now, a shadow that would linger at the edges of his mind for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale of the Bánánach, one of the most fearsome creatures in Irish mythology, don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories of folklore and myth. Share your thoughts about the Bánánach, and let us know what legends you want to hear next. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you ever hear a whisper in the wind calling your name, think twice before you follow.